Around Thanksgiving in 2006, a narcotics task force with the Atlanta Police Department was out on patrol, I guess, and they saw someone walking alongside of the road, a guy that they had previously arrested for various drug offenses. They jumped out on him, threw him to the ground, pulled a gun on him, and we would later find out planted a bag of marijuana on him. He knew he had a long rap sheet. They knew he had a long rap sheet. So they told him they would let him go if he would tell them where they could find a supply of drugs. So he made up an address, basically on the spot. An address happened to be that of Catherine Johnston. It's a 92-year-old woman who lived in a rough part of Atlanta. Catherine Johnston kept an old rusty revolver by her bed that she used to scare off people when she felt threatened. Now, what's supposed to happen at this point when they get a tip like this is they're supposed to get a confidential informant to do a controlled buy from this address. But that process could take 2 to 3 days in Atlanta, and they wanted to get to this drug supply immediately for reasons that I'll explain in a minute. So instead, they made up an informant, just lied on the affidavit, created an informant out of thin air, claimed that he had bought the drugs from this address, and instead of taking a few days, the process took a few hours, and by later that evening, they were breaking down Catherine Johnston's door. She heard people breaking into her house. She gets up, grabs her trusty, rusty, non-functional revolver. When they break down the door, she's standing there holding a gun. They open fire and kill her. Now, they originally claimed that she had fired at them first. We later found out that wasn't true. The gun didn't work. 2 officers were hit by bullets fired by other police officers. They called 2 ambulances for the wounded officers. They did not call an ambulance initially for Catherine Johnston. Instead, they handcuffed her and left her to bleed to death on her living room floor, while one officer then went down to the basement to plant marijuana that they claimed she had sold. So at this point, they realize they have to cover their tracks, right? They have to find an informant who's going to say he was the informant named on the search warrant. So they go to this guy that they've used in past investigations, and informants tend to be somewhat shady characters, rival drug dealers, drug addicts, people who are trying to get their own charges dropped or diminished. And to his credit, this guy would not play along. There's this amazing 911 call that where he dials the number from the back of a cruiser in Atlanta and says, they're trying to get me to say I helped kill that old lady, and I don't want any part of it. He realizes that this is not going, the conversation he's having with these Atlanta police officers isn't going well, so he jumps out of the car and starts to flee. They pursue him. There's this surreal chase through downtown Atlanta where he's trying to run. He's running through businesses. They're chasing after him. He was also working with the ATF at the time. He finds a phone, calls his ATF handler, who sort of swoops in, picks him up, and drives him out to the suburbs. They put him up in a hotel. Now there's a federal investigation. So what we found.
Hey, I want to welcome everybody to You and the Law podcast show. Tonight we're joined with a special guest who's joining the podcast show. This is going to be a good podcast, Chief Humphrey. But I want you to introduce our guest tonight.
Yeah, I'd like to introduce my main man, Radley Balco, who is a renowned reporter for big ticket media. Radley and I came to know each other about 2 years ago when I was the chief in Little Rock, and there was a lot of things going on. And Radley had been familiar with Little Rock on some previous cases dealing with bad shootings and no-knock warrants. And so he's a good friend of my attorney's, and he, man, has been amazing on the reports and things that he's done, the articles that he has done on me and Little Rock and other police departments throughout the nation. So I just thought it would be a good thing to have Radley on, since we've got all of these things going on in the nation right now involving policeman misconduct. And so Radley, welcome, man. We really appreciate his honor. It's an honor to have you, man. I appreciate you being with us.
Thanks for having me on. My pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, Radley, with a background in journalist that you have and being the author of a book that's Rise with the Warrior Cop, You know, we've got a lot to talk about tonight, and I think that
It's
conversation
not
that you.
often it's not often two police officers want to talk to me and not yell at me. So this is a pleasure.
No, we don't have to worry about that. We don't have to worry
No.
about that tonight, man.
No, no, and so for those who are tuning into the podcast show tonight, our topic is what causes police misconduct. And Radley, the video, the clip that I just played, opening up the podcast, had never seen that before. While preparing for the podcast show, I found that where you were speaking to this group about this 92-year-old lady who was shot and killed in her home on a botched drug raid by this group of Atlanta police officers. And to know that these officers, this was somebody's grandmother, this was somebody's mother, and to hear you talk about how they just let her later to die and didn't offer any kind of medical treatment, and then to plant drugs in her house. This brings us to this conversation of what causes police misconduct from someone like you that investigates these types of misconducts across the country.
Yeah, I mean, what we'd later learn in Atlanta was that the narcotics units there had quotas. They had to make so many arrests and seize a minimum quantity of illicit drugs, and their raises, promotions, their year-end reviews were based on meeting those quotas. And so there was a lot of pressure on them to meet these quotas. And that obviously doesn't excuse the behavior, but it does help you see kind of how much pressure they were under, and why they might take shortcuts in a case like this to try to get there before the drug supply was moved or sold or whatever. But this was not the only time this had happened. And I think, as a journalist, I've learned that anytime you see one incident like this, the one that, the odds are that the only time it's happened to be the time that you learn about it are pretty slim. It's probably happened a lot of other times. And, that's true in Memphis after Tyree Nichols with these Scorpion units, but it was also true in Atlanta. There was a woman, another elderly woman who lived right down the road who these these narcotics units had raided mistakenly, getting the wrong house. People just started coming forward left and right after Captain Johnson saying this happened to us too. And generally the people that this kind of thing happens to are people who don't have a voice, don't have a platform, can't afford an attorney, probably couldn't get an attorney to believe them anyway. So yeah, I've been doing this for 20 years now. And a lot of times I feel like, I joke with my wife, I feel like I'm writing the same 10 articles over and over again, because you just see these patterns, and it's really never ending. But I think it's about bad incentives. It's about when Mayor Strickland in Memphis was touting these Scorpion units, he wasn't saying look, if we look at surveys in the communities that we're sending these officers, there's more satisfaction with police. People are more trustful of police. Polls show that the police are, getting more cooperation, more help from people. There's more calls to 911. No, when he's touting him, he's saying, look at how many arrests they made. That's how you measure success, and how they measure success. And, what we've seen now is, there's just an AP story I linked to today on Twitter, where it's, they went out and interviewed people in Tyree Nichols' community, and people were scared of the police. They're not going to call the police when something goes wrong. They're not going to help with investigations. When the cops when these Scorpion units were in that neighborhood, people were texting each other and telling them not to come out of the house. They were more afraid of the police than they were of criminals. And there's polling showing that particularly among Black Americans, they fear criminals more than they fear the police. And I think that's a really kind of sad commentary on where we are right now. Well, that's a long answer to your question.
Yeah, that is. And, I'll tell you, Radley, is in being a police executive and making the decisions to start a unit of that nature, street crimes unit, impact unit, or whatever, name really is important. It is important to get the right name. And I think a lot of times we don't want a name like impact. That's a lot more, and then be able to explain the acronym, what it means. When we talking about units, we like Scorpion, it gets to the point of where we're hoping that it sends the message that we have a zero tolerance for crime. I get it. But I've also said is that just as easily as you construct those units, you have to be willing to break those units down. And it also, lets you know, like you said, when you start turning over rocks in those areas, you're going to find a whole lot of things that unit was responsible for. Because basically, what you've done is you've released the dogs. You've basically said, by any means necessary, do what you need to do, which makes them prima donnas and thinking that they're untouchable.
Yeah, and we've seen that, that's a story we've seen again over and over again. I wrote about this in the New York Times. We saw it. I mean, you can go back to Detroit with the stress units in the early 70s that they had to disband because they had shot, 24 people. And they finally disbanded them when they raided a poker game that was attended by some black sheriff's deputies in Detroit, ended up killing one of them. But it was. Then you get the Rampart scandal in Los Angeles. You get the SOS units in Chicago. Most recently, you've got the gun crimes unit in Baltimore. And I think anytime what's interesting is when you read city officials announcing these units, they want to show how tough they're being on crime, and for them the only way to show you're being tough on crime is to be more aggressive and to be to kind of let officers knock heads, and you kind of look the other way. And when they describe these units, inevitably they talk about how aggressive they're going to be, and that this is going to be proactive policing. And the insinuation is that we're going to sort of let them off leash and let them kind of do what they need to do. And you never hear them say, we chose cops for this unit based on their temperament, right? We want to make sure we have the right people who know the community, for example, who have ties to the community, who have the trust of the community. That's, as you guys know more than I do, that's for sure, that, you have to have the trust of the community to be able to solve crimes. And when you're, pulling people over for low level offenses and pointing your guns and screaming at them, which, looks like this unit did pretty routinely. I don't know. Common sense suggests that's not a way to get the community to cooperate with you when you're trying to solve crimes.
A lot of these units are put together based on performance, based on number of tickets, number of arrests. This is a good guy. He seems like he fits the mold of what we're looking for. Not based on performance, not based on disciplinary records. It's based on how many tickets, how many arrests, how many use of force complaints you got, because we want a person in there that's going to be a go-getter. And so now you minimize supervision over these units, and now you see what can happen.
Yeah. And I think the thing you mentioned about name is important because, when you name it something like Scorpion or Crash, or I think Memphis had one called Blue Crash. Atlanta had a group called the Red Dogs, I think. Not only does that send a message to the community about, what this unit is capable of, I think you're also attracting officers who want to be feared, right? The guy who wants to be on a unit called Scorpion, is probably not the guy who's got a lot of close ties in that neighborhood. And it's a name that is to be feared, and it's a name that's going to attract officers who want to be feared, I think. And it really also just kind of reveals the motivations of the department when, it's, or at least in this case, I mean, the mayor, I think, was really touting these units also. I don't know. I mean, I can only go by kind of the history that I've seen over the years of my research and reporting. And it just, maybe there's a case to be made that they can solve, or they can tamper down crime in particular neighborhoods. But I think the data is a little mixed as far as I'm concerned, but also I just think that the trust that they undermine in the grand scheme of things, maybe it doesn't, they're not particularly worth it. I mean, New York, Sean Bell was killed by one of these street crimes units. Eric Garner was killed by one of these street crime units. Amadou Diallo
Yeah.
was killed by one of these street crime. I mean, those are, infamous names. It's a lot of damage to the trust between NYPD and the city.
Yeah. Well, Radley, you bring up, like what happened in Memphis, where, most likely those 5 guys and all the other ones, they were from parts of that community. I mean, some of them probably grew up in that community, probably went to school, some of the, schools or churches in that community. And, for people to fear them instead of respecting them, that sends the wrong message. So, and I think this is a question that, I shared this on one of my other social media platforms, is that we got to have some real tough, serious conversations that we most likely don't want to have, especially in the Black community, about what does this say about our Black police officers who are treating other Black citizens just like how other white cops are treating them. So, and this is why there's such a distrust between the Black community and police when they say, well, see, you guys are no different than the white cops are.
Yeah.
So why should we trust you? And and that's a concern. And I think, sometimes we don't want to have these conversations, but then when you get a mayor like Strickland who stands up and really kind of praises these type of units, and the people in the community, and I use this word like they say, the streets know what's going on. So as people, after this deal with Tyre Nichols happened, you've seen where other people in the community, they're coming out, they're talking about their interaction with this group, and it's not positive. And so let me ask you this question, going back to all the cases all the cities that you mentioned that have had these types of units. When you think that some of these mayors or those who are in positions like we are as being police chiefs would say, look what happened in LA with Crash. Why would we want to bring something like that to our department? And like you said, you're going to get a group of guys who they work out a lot. Now this is a way for them to really kind of show off, other skills that they shouldn't be using while they're trying to enforce the laws. But then it also leads officers to do the things that happened with the 92-year-old lady in Atlanta, plant drugs that wasn't even there.
Yeah, I think it's just easy for these politicians to do this. I mean, I think we have this template that we go back to over and over again, and I think it's a false choice. But it's this idea that you can have safety or you can have your rights, and you can't have both. And it's a constant trade-off. And so if we want more safety, we have to give up more rights. If we want more rights, we have to give up more safety. And I just don't think I don't think it has to be that way. I mean, I think that there's a reason why cities that have had consistently high violent crime over the last 10, 15 years, even as crime was going down in the rest of the country. So places like St. Louis, Chicago, Cleveland, Baltimore, every one of those cities has a long and well-documented history of police abuse, police racism, and police corruption. Every one of those cities, DOJ wrote a report about that. If you read those reports, like your jaw hits the floor when you read about some of the documented abuses. And I think there's a correlation there for a reason. It's that when you have that kind of history and that kind of violence, people don't trust the police. And so they don't cooperate with them, and they don't call 911, and they don't answer questions. And then you have your stop snitching movements and, discouraging people from cooperating at all. But for like somebody like Strickland, you're the mayor of Memphis, crime is going up in 2020 and 2021. It's going up everywhere else too. But it's an easier argument for him to say to voters, hey, I'm going to get tough. We're going to form these units that have a badass name, and I'm going to, they're going to give them less supervision and more authority and a long leash and a very vague mandate to kind of do whatever they want. And it's playing into that false choice, because that's how people think. When people think when crime goes up, we got to start knocking heads, and it's easy for politicians to sort of play into that. It's much more difficult for somebody like Strickland to say, well, no, actually, what we need is officers walking more beats and getting to know the people in their neighborhoods and earning their trust. That's not an easy sell. But now that we've seen the results of that, I hope people will hold politicians like Strickland accountable and say, look, this is on you too, right? It's not just on the police chief. It's certainly not on Tyre Nichols or his family. Other people need to answer for this, and I think Strickland is one of them.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting, Radley? There's a model out there, just what you talked about, and our late peer Greg Allen, who was the chief in El Paso, was amazing at doing that. And El Paso being a major city, and it's right on the border, and they drastically cut crime there.
El Paso. I've written about El Paso. El Paso's has a just astonishingly low murder rate. I mean, it's
especially being close to the border.
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of the city right on the other side of the border from El Paso, Juarez had one of the highest murder rates in the world.
Yeah.
And El Paso is right across the border, and there were years in the mid 2000s where they had less than 10 murders a year for a city of 600,000. So it can be done, it can, and I wish more people would sort of learn that lesson.
Well, I mean, like I said, the model's there. Camden, New Jersey, same thing. It's there. The model is there. It's just the fact of do we feel like as police chiefs, do we feel as though we've got to stick with this reactive method, this strong arm method? And I've said, and before I left Little Rock, I made it very clear, and I said this for 2 years. Violent crime is a public health issue, and you have to attack it that way. You have to bring different resources in to address that. Police can only do so much. And I think when we start looking at it that way, I think you'll start seeing the reduction, and you'll start seeing us building that trust back. But this Tyre Nichols thing knocked us back 30 years.
I mean, it's hard. I've become very cynical in this, and it's hard for me to be shocked these days. But man, that video, I think when we see those videos, usually it's, they're horrific and awful. A lot of them are, but like you can, they're not excusable, but you can sort of understand why an officer may have been caught, in a moment of, fear or adrenaline or, whatever. There's a period of 20 or 30 seconds where horrible things happen, but you can kind of understand why somebody might have kind of lost their shit in that particular moment. I hope that's okay for me to say that.
No, that's okay.
Yeah. But in the Tyre Nichols video, I mean, they stopped to tie their shoes and then went back to beating him again. One guy lost his glasses and they helped him look for him, and then they went back to beating him. They stopped to catch their breath, and then went back to beating him. I mean, the sheer humanity. I mean, I was kind of astonished as I was watching, and I had to stop watching him when he started calling out for his mom. It was just too much.
Yeah. Well, and I think what happened in Minneapolis shocked a lot of people because of how, not just here in the United States, but it went globally, where people came out in protest because how could a police officer kneel on the neck of a man and basically kill him, suffocate him for over 8 minutes? That really shook the core of a lot of people. And so here we are 2 years later, and you see black police officers beating the crap out of another black man who had done nothing. And, like you said, these guys were out of shape. They were walking around. They couldn't catch their breath. They were limping. Then all of a sudden they're coming up with their conversations about, oh man, he went for my gun, or, he was, we were chasing him and all this other. I mean, just to hear the unprofessionalism of these guys, but then people were still shocked. but and as you know, Bradley, I mean, you do a lot of research and looking at a lot of things. And I'll tell you, just in the last 2 years since we've been doing this podcast show, the amount of videos that you find is disturbing to see that this is this is something that takes place between the West Coast and the East Coast, up north and down south. So this is something that's widespread. And I think, we get into the conversation, Bradley, that hey, we got over 800,000 police officers, and everybody says that 1%. And I'm gonna ask you this question: do you think it's more than the 1%?
I mean, look, I think there's the 1 or 2% that are just, shouldn't be anywhere near a badge or a gun. I think there are probably some that are another percentage that, probably require a lot of supervision. And then I think, there are a lot of officers out there that probably want to do the right thing, but it's difficult, right? Because you're going to face retaliation from other officers. I wrote about a lot of this in Little Rock, as Chief Humphrey knows, that a lot of officers who tried to report other officers for misconduct were punished by the police union. They had to endure retaliation. They were harassed. They got racist crap put in their mailboxes and got nasty emails from people and phone calls from people. So when when you talk about systemic problems in policing and people think you're saying every police officer is corrupt or abusive, I mean, that's not what you're saying at all. What you're saying is you have a system that consistently produces videos like the one we saw in Memphis, and you've got a system where whatever the percentage is, whether it's 1, 3, 5, 10% of the officers who are definitely don't need to be anywhere near a badge and a gun, when the system can't hold them accountable, when they get pass after pass after pass, or they get fired and then the union somehow gets them their job back, or they just get hired by the next county, the agency, the next county over. I mean, that is a broken system. You don't have to, a broken system, a systemic issues doesn't mean, all 95% of the officers are bad. It just means that the system's incapable of holding accountable the ones who are.
Yeah. Well, hey, everybody, I want to remind you that we have a guest tonight on the podcast show. We're talking with, I'm getting over, we're talking with journalist who has written a book called Rise of the Warrior Cop. And, for those who are just now tuning into the podcast show, tonight's topic is what causes police misconduct. And for those of you who are listening to us on our YouTube channel, our Facebook channel, and LinkedIn, join in on the chat. We got a lot of comments coming in on the chat room. And one of those comments, Keith, is asking the question, when I just posed this question about the 1%, is it more than the 1%? I want to get back up to that comment.
Let me say this, Virgil. And I always say, because I try to be an optimist, but I have to be a realist too. I say 1%. That's still a lot. But then when you say 1%, that could be 1,000 police departments. And there's a lot of small. And when I mean that, 80% of the police departments in the nation are 10 people or less. So you're talking about you could have 1,000 police officers that are committing these, and it's a shame that that cities had to put in had to make resolutions for duty to intervene. I mean, why should I have to tell somebody, make a policy for somebody to intervene? The other question someone asked, are they trained that way? Kind of hard to say, because I think each department has its own way of doing things. Don't know what type of training these officers go through. Don't know if they go through tactical training. Don't know if they go through another psychological. Don't know. I just know that I've seen these units created based on guys' performance when it comes to reactive and not proactive, because you're looking for a hard charger. You're looking for those individuals that want they call it command respect, but at the end of the day, it's demand respect based on their actions. And so, and then there was another question, Virgil, about the model. Why don't other departments follow the model? That's a good question. because fighting crime is an imminent situation. And to establish a department to follow a model and to be best practices, it takes a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of resources, and it takes a strong chief to say, this is what we're going to do. So you have to start having your government officials make that a priority. You have to have the police chief making the priority, the supervisors pushing it down. You got to look at your policies. You got to look at you got to look at everything. But the policy, the foundations are there. It's just that, do police chiefs believe in their mind, in their professional opinion, do they believe that these models, like Camden, New Jersey, like El Paso, like other departments that have, other cities that have seen drastic drops in crime, will these models work for their respective departments? Because it's all about imminent change, imminent attention.
Yeah. Well, Keith, one of the things that Radley mentioned was about, let's just go back to Memphis, because that just recently happened, where the mayor has come out in strong supporter of this Scorpion unit. So what does that put somebody like me and you and Chief Davis in a position where the optics of what's going on in the world, you may not want to do that, but the political side of it is the driving force behind it. So how do you stand up to somebody who hired you and say, listen, this isn't best for this police department? Now you're going to be, potentially looking to say, hey, if you don't want to do it, if you don't want to implement this, then we'll find somebody who will. So how do, especially Black police chiefs, how do you maneuver around that when there is this political climate around the rising crime?
Was that for me or Radley?
For both. I know Radley has, with his journal, how he's investigated. What do you think about that, Radley?
Well, I don't think I'm qualified to answer how I would deal with that as a Black police chief, but I can.
Well, let's just say as an investigative journalist.
Right. I mean, no, that's a really tough call, and obviously when you have political pushback and you're trying to implement good. I mean, it's the reverse policy of what Chief Humphrey went through in Little Rock, right? He was trying to implement reforms and was getting political pushback from city officials, particularly on the city council. So what do you do if your city council or your mayor wants bad policies that you don't want to implement? I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to contradict your people. The politicians who oversee you. I mean, you do it in private, maybe. I don't know. It's a difficult decision. I do think, the answer here, I think, is it's not the most satisfying answer, but I think the people who live in these cities need to make their voices heard. They need to support, mayors and city council members who are going to not just appoint, reform-oriented police chiefs, but are going to support them when the inevitable backlash comes from people who don't want reform, from people who like the system the way it is. I'll let if Chief Humphrey wants to field that one.
Yeah, I said so. I was fortunate in Little Rock. I did work for a mayor that understood, and I even said it through the process, because one of the things when you have the community meetings, the first thing the citizens want to know: what are you going to do to stop murders? What are you going to do to stop violent crime? First thing you say, you can't. All efforts are going to be put in place to minimize those and reduce. So you have to stick with that. What I've seen some peers go in automatically and say, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. They'll say what they need to say to get the job, but in reality, you can't put that kind of pressure on yourself. You got to see, especially if you're coming from the outside, you got to see what you have to work with and the resources that you have. But you have to just be straight and say, listen, this is what's going to happen. If we do things like this, this is going to cost the city a lot of problems. Every city in the nation, every police department in the nation is one incident away from being on CNN and being on worldwide news. And so if we do things like this, then this is what's going to happen. You've got to let me do the job. And then if I'm not doing what's up to your expectations, then it may be time for us to separate. But you have to stick with that point, and they bring you in, and this is what happens. I'm gonna say this really quickly. I promise you.
Now you can't say nothing real quickly.
Well, this is something I'm very passionate about, and I promise you this, man. When you sign a contract to become a chief, and you sign it and based on the things that you think will get you the job, you'll die by those words.
Yeah.
Your career will be ended by those words. And so when you go in and you lay out your platform, that's why I'm glad when I've gone through processes that I've had a living document that I use to talk about what my timeline will be. And then I use that hopefully for the community to hold me accountable to that. So I haven't said anything. I haven't done anything. I have not failed to do anything I said I was going to do. So you have to have those conversations. And my focus is always having the community holding the elected officials accountable. And then you got to hold them accountable before they can hold me accountable.
Yeah. Well, hey, Radley and Keith, I got a video clip I want to show because it's as we talk about what causes police misconduct, just how something simply as a traffic stop of what happened in Memphis. And this took place in Jacksonville, Florida.
Live from the local station, News 4 Jax starts now.
Right now at 6 o'clock, the News 4 Jax I-Team has obtained police body camera video from a traffic stop late last month involving a local Navy veteran who complains he was racially profiled.
Listen, I'm a black man in America.
I'm asking you a question.
I'm terrified of the police.
Mr. Blackman, I'm asking you a question. How many different sirens did I turn on? How many times did I lay on my horn?
The driver you just heard exchanging those words with an officer, Braxton Smith, tells the News 4 Jax I-Team Jacksonville police yanked him out of his car, handcuffed him, and illegally searched his vehicle.
And the video reveals officers thought Smith was trying to elude arrest. News 4 Jax I-Team investigator Tarek Miner obtained the video, and he's joining us now to walk us through it. Tarek.
So Jacksonville sheriff's officers say Braxton traveled approximately 300 yards before he pulled his car over. That's the length of 3 football fields, roughly 45 seconds to a minute at a slow pace. Smith says he didn't pull over immediately because he wanted to find a well-lit, safe place to stop. He says he still doesn't know why he was pulled over. Lights and sirens along Gulf Air Boulevard the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving, and a traffic stop that started at Pearl Street and ended in a business parking lot.
Turn it off.
It's off.
Hands out the window. Put your hands out the window.
The driver, Braxton Smith, is seen here with his hands out of the window. He's holding his driver's license and registration. Officers suspect Smith committed a crime.
Don't move.
I ain't moving. What's up?
Can you unlock it?
Huh? Reach right there. Man, just
Don't
reach
worry
right
about
there.
it. You keep your freaking hands out the window and shut your mouth. I'll figure it out. Yeah. He's routed.
What's up, officer? What's going on?
What's up?
How you doing?
What is going on?
Come on, you gonna buckle me? I'm chilling. What's up? I'm chilling. What's up? I'm chilling, officer. I'm cool. I'm doing that. Look at me. I'm doing that. What's up? Come on, man. He resisting.
JSO task force members tell Smith he was acting as if he wasn't going to pull his vehicle over, while Smith tells the News 4 Jax I-Team he was illegally detained, searched, and questioned for 30 minutes. On the video, police ask Smith if he smokes hemp and tell him he's going to jail. From the News 4 Jax Sky4 drone, you can see how far Smith traveled along Gulf Air Boulevard with officers behind him. He says he was pulled over after speaking with a man at this nearby convenience store. Smith tells officers he was trying to find a safe place to pull over for police and himself. He's read his Miranda rights and then questioned.
You're trying to find a safe spot for you or for me?
For both of us.
No, you don't get to do that.
Okay, that's understandable. I mean, what was so detrimental between me stopping right there and stopping right here?
I'd like to ask you that. Why did you keep driving?
I just told you that. I just told you that. Why would
There's
I
a lot of
stop
moving around in that car.
You just looked in it.
Shut your mouth. Don't get all loud with me. They ain't gonna change nothing.
Hey,
here.
I'm just talking. I'm having a conversation with you, right?
No, you're trying to talk over me. So why didn't you stop?
I just told you why I didn't
Because you
stop.
think
I
that
had
you're
no
you
other
think you're
reason.
smarter than everyone
Look what you
else.
just did to me. You just snatched me out my car. I rolled the windows down
Why?
and gave my license, my registration. You ain't read me no right. You snatched me out the car.
You're damn right I did. Why did I do that? Why?
I don't know. I had the slightest idea.
How about because
Run my name.
for
Run
300
my
yards I had my lights. How many different sirens did I turn on?
Listen, I'm a black man in
I'm
America.
asking you a question.
I'm terrified of the police.
Mr. Black Man, I'm asking you a question. How many different sirens did I turn on? How many times did I lay on my horn?
While Smith is being questioned, police search his car for drugs but don't find any. They then move to the trunk where they locate the veteran's holstered handgun. One of the officers alleges while Smith was being pulled over, he somehow reached behind him and put the gun in the trunk through the back seat.
He absolutely could have. Grab right here. Easily. And look where it is, right in the front.
See if he's a convicted felon.
I'll go run him for that.
Officers on scene determined Smith was not a convicted felon. They then question him as to why he doesn't have a concealed carry license for his gun.
How come you can buy a gun but you can't have a CWL?
Hey, so what's the process of buying a gun, right? You go through the background. I've bought guns my whole life, bro. I'm a veteran. I'm served 10 years in the military.
After more than 30 minutes, JSO task force members let Smith go without charging him with any crime.
All right, here's the deal. So my traffic program is messed up, so I can't write a ticket right now. And we have gunshots down the road that I'm going to go respond to. So those two reasons are getting you out of the ticket tonight, okay?
Smith maintains that he was racially profiled. He has filed a formal complaint against the JSO task force officer seen in that video. JSO says the incident is being administratively reviewed. It's also notable that the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office released this body camera footage to News4JAX within 8 days of our request. Tom?
Radley, when I found that, man, here's another task force that, you already know what they're doing, they're targeting. But to hear their conversations about saying that this guy, while he was driving, put the gun in the trunk. So that was disturbing, but
I hope he plays basketball somewhere because he's clearly got the longest arms anybody.
Yeah. But then, okay, Mr. Black Man, so as I stated earlier that this is so widespread, and I think this is why I come to the conclusion that it's more than the 1%. And it's bad to say that being a police chief, that because you find so many different types of encounters between white police officers and black citizens, and then even how white police officers treat other Caucasians. But it's so widespread across the country. So that's why, unfortunately, I believe it's more than that 1% that we continue to say out of the 800,000 police officers, that's only 1% of that. That's concerning.
Well, so one of the things I talk about in the book is the book talks about police militarization, but there's two sides to it. One is the stuff, right? The militarized gear, the camouflage, the weapons, the stuff from that you get from the Defense Department and DHS. You can talk about whether or not that stuff is appropriate for use in neighborhoods and American streets, American cities. The other side, I think, is the militarized kind of mentality, and it's this. Policing has become, I think, a very isolated profession in a lot of ways. It's hard to find a profession that's more kind of, for lack of a better term, sensitive and defensive. And there's a kind of a really strong bond there. I mean, it's very difficult to find police officers who are willing to criticize other police officers publicly after one of these events. This is one of the few. Tyree Nichols is one of the few cases I think where you did see a lot of that. But when you go on police bulletin boards and discussions online, you often hear this phrase, "Whatever I have to do to get home at night or to get home safe at night."
Yeah,
and that's really like a kind of a battlefield mentality, right? That's like thinking that your job is, you're constantly under attack. You constantly have a target on your back, and it's not about kind of serving the community. It's whatever you have to do, personally to make sure that you're protected and you're safe. And, I can understand why. I mean, if it's a dangerous job, I can understand that. But I think there needs to be, I think there's a broader issue with police culture that we need to sort of have a discussion about, not here, but sort of more broadly. There was a study, I think it was BuzzFeed put out a couple of years ago, that found like 20 to 25% of active duty police officers, and I think they looked at 10 or 15 different large departments across the country, had posted something on their social media pages that was either racist, misogynist, or celebrated police violence in some way.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty big percentage, right?
Yeah.
And I've written about a lot of these elite, sort of quote unquote elite units. They'll have logos and patches and challenge coins that feature like the Grim Reaper or Skull and Crossbones. Some sort of death theme. The street crimes unit in New York was known to wear these shirts that had a quote on the back from Ernest Hemingway about the joys of hunting men, right? Of hunting other human beings. So I think you've got the small percentage of police officers who are just sort of irreparably bad and shouldn't be anywhere near policing. But I do think you have this larger defensive culture. I think the unions help perpetuate it. You've got the blue wall, obviously. I mean, the blue wall is definitely more than 1%, right? I mean, the percentage of police officers who aren't going to testify against another officer is way more than 1%. Yeah. So I think there are different levels of it. But, the last thing I would just say is that, the phrase "just a few bad apples" gets tossed around a lot. Well, that phrase, if you actually look at what that phrase means, it's that if you don't get rid of the bad apples, it spreads and it spoils the whole bushel, right? The whole point of that phrase is you have to get rid of the bad ones. Otherwise they all become bad. And I think, I think it is actually, it's not used correctly, but I think it is a pretty apt metaphor because, I think there is a problem with when you get a few bad officers, they tend to recruit other bad officers. And I think it was the Marshall Project did an investigation a few years ago that found that the officers that are used in a lot of departments as field training officers tend to be officers that have the longest disciplinary records. And those are the guys; those are the people that you're using to train the new recruits. I mean, that's really disturbing, I think.
Well, I'll tell you what's interesting. Radley, you said something interesting in Arkansas. Once a person becomes a field training officer, you can't remove that privilege. You can physically stop them from training, but they'll still be a field training officer. You have to go through a decertification process, and even in that decertification process, there's no guarantee that that's going to happen. So when you make someone a field training officer, you're pretty much stuck with them in the state of Arkansas, and so. That's interesting, where really a field training officer should be an appointed position to where if someone is not doing what they need to do, they can be immediately removed. You shouldn't have to go through a process. But I will tell you, once again, you said something that hit the nail on the head. We are a sensitive profession.
Very sensitive.
Everything personally. Yeah. Everything personally. And I do think a lot of times we do react on our emotions. Just to cover this, the most disturbing part of the Tyre Nichols thing was to watch this man be beat to death, right? But I would think the second most thing that just really shocked me was that you had an African American officer who I guess got the direct residual of the OC spray, the mace, and you see this man washing his face to get the residue off, washing it. My eyes are burning. I'm burning. He keeps pouring water. And anybody who's ever been maced knows that it does prevent you from thinking clearly, and it also hinders you from operating a vehicle. What did he do? Once he got a little bit of that clarity where he could see, he jumps in the police car and goes down to the scene where Tyre Nichols is and gets out and participates in this beating. So that in itself right there shows you how emotional we can be. When that adrenaline starts kicking in, we get emotional. And bottom line is, how dare you run from me? How dare you do this? I'm going to get you. I just thought that was a very shocking part of that video also.
Yeah, it seemed like they were, it seemed like they were most pissed off about the fact that he had outrun them.
It's called POP. It's called POP, pissed off the police.
Yeah.
Well,
like even that Jacksonville video you just showed, that guy didn't get beaten. He didn't get, he obviously wasn't killed, but is that guy ever going to cooperate with the police, willingly or voluntarily? He's going to go home and tell his family what happened. He's probably going to tell people at his church what happened. He's going to tell his friends what happened. And that's an incident that, normally, I would imagine that happens hundreds of times a night across this country. And that guy and everybody he talks to about that incident are it's only going to further strain their relationship with the police and their willingness to cooperate with them.
Well, and the fact that he was also a military veteran.
Yeah. He was. Right. Rather, let me ask you a question. Why has body cameras not been a deterrent in these type of actions? In your point of view, why have they not been a deterrent?
That's a really good question. I when they first started coming out, I was careful to, I wrote a little bit about them, and people were kind of touting them as kind of a panacea, that they were going to fix police misconduct for good. And, they're only as good as the policies that we use to implement them, right? So I know, I think it's North Carolina, maybe the legislature there passed a law that said the police can release body cam video anytime they want, police departments can, but they're never obligated to. Well, that's all that's going to do is just undermine trust, because from the public's point of view, you're only going to release video when it vindicates you, and you're not going to release them when it doesn't. It had to come with the right policies. I think there are a few places that got it right, but I'm glad we have it. It's better that we have it than we don't. For cases like, in Tyree Nichols' case, there's no way those officers would still be working if it weren't for that video. I don't think there's any question about that. So I'm glad we have it, but I look at that video and I look at what they were doing on the video, and they beat that guy to death knowing that they were on video, right? Knowing that their cameras were capturing and all. And I just wonder if maybe that the situation in Memphis is so bad that they just assume somebody would take care of the video for them, or it just wouldn't matter.
Well, Radley, I think one of the things that stood out for me, some of them put their body cameras down. If it hadn't been for him running into that neighborhood, and for whatever led him to that corner, for that Skycop camera to be there, I don't believe we would have known everything that we know now, because that Skycop camera caught more than they body cameras did, because a lot of them turn off their cameras and set them down. And then one of them, as you realize, one of them actually looks up, because they got the little blue light that flashes. One of them looks up with the flashlight. So, but they never really, they were caught up into the adrenaline and never said anything, or never said anything that we know about, hey guys, there's this Skycop camera up there.
But even that initial stop, that was caught on the body cameras where they knew their cameras were on. That was
bizarre.
They just yanked him out of the car, and they're pointing guns at him and screaming at him,
and that and that's what the former guy named Hemphill, former officer named Hemphill. That's what he got. One of the things he got fired for lying about the traffic stop, and that's going to be interesting. What comes out in the arrest warrants, or which comes out in the trial? What was the purpose of that stop?
Yeah.
What was the initial purpose of that stop?
Well, and as people are speculating, and I think we've all seen the speculation out there that this main police officer, that this Tyreek Nichols, who worked at FedEx, this guy's ex-wife worked there, and they suspected that there was some type of affair.
Allegedly,
but and there again, and I'll say this, Keith, and I think and I used this term earlier, when the streets talk, but 100% of it, I'm going to say 99.9% may be right, because they know what's going on. And so when the police come out and say something differently, the community knows what's
But that
going on.
doesn't, I mean, that could explain why it just persists, the beating persists for as long as it does, if it's some sort of grudge situation. But, the New York Times, the Associated Press, some local journalists in Memphis have found, they've talked to lots of people that had similar experiences. And obviously they weren't beaten for 7 or 8 minutes, but they were pulled over for a minor traffic violation. They were yanked out of their car, handcuffed, screamed at, had guns pointed out, subjected to illegal searches. I mean, that part of it seems, seems like it's almost operating procedure for this unit. And those weren't,
Yeah. Well, I spent a couple of years as a police chief in Arkansas, the city that not about 70 miles from Memphis. Prior to me coming there, they had a unit that the community called the Jump Out Boys. Yeah. And these guys would jump out, literally take people to an abandoned gas station, literally beat the crap out of them, take them back, and drop them off.
This was in Memphis or outside of Memphis?
This was outside of Memphis, in a city where I was the police chief at it, in Arkansas, just on the Mississippi River. They literally would take people there, beat the crap out of them, and if they had drugs on them, they would take their drugs, take them back, but nobody said anything. And this was a department that was pretty much the same racial makeup, but much smaller than Memphis, where all the officers were Black. So, which was very disturbing to know that this is a community that you grew up in, and this is how you treat people that you went to school with, that you see every single day. You don't really value their life, and so that's a in Memphis as well as in other cities in Arkansas, that's a big problem.
Yeah, the jump out. I mean, the jump out. Phrase jump out has been used in a lot of different cities. I know DC had some jump out units for a while. LA did. And yeah, I mean, this is the thing, when you talk about, again, I'll go back to this. You talk about systemic problems and you talk about systemic racism, and people think that means you're accusing everybody of, in that system of being racist. And that's not what it is. It's about systems that treat people in a racist way, regardless of kind of the motivations that people working with. So, the elite gun crimes unit in Baltimore that, 8 of the officers went to prison for what they were doing. I think all but 2 of them were Black, and, Baltimore, good percentage of the police department there is Black, but that doesn't mean, it can't be racist because it certainly has been.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hey, Radley, man, we're coming up on the last few minutes of the podcast show, man. And I tell you what, an hour goes by real quick when you're having a good conversation. I think this topic is going to surprise a lot of people that, 2 Black police chiefs are having such a conversation about things that's going on in policing that needs to change with police misconduct.
Yeah, I mean, I think the series I did on Little Rock, talking to the Black officers there, was really enlightening. I mean, I think obviously, you can have bad Black officers as well, as we saw in Memphis, but I think you guys have experienced kind of the racism on the inside and the outside of the department, and I think your perspectives are important and valuable. And I think there's a reason why a lot of cities like Little Rock have separate Black police unions, because the kind of institutional unions that have been there forever just aren't representing them both inside and outside the department.
Yeah. Well, hey, Chief Swaggy One, man, I appreciate you getting our guest on the show. And Radley, hopefully we can get you back on. I know you say you were going to be starting your own podcast show, but we would definitely enjoy have you back on to talk about some other things that you have been involved with.
No, I'd love to. Yeah. I mean, I learned some stuff tonight too. So I got a lot out of it as well. Be happy to come back on.
All right.
I appreciate you, Bradley. I do, man. And you've been there for me, man, and you have been very honest, and I appreciate you, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I couldn't have written that story without you, and wasn't all flattering for you, but I appreciate your help, and
it is what it is.
I'm glad we get to tell that story.
Yeah. Well, hey, we want to thank everybody for tuning in to the podcast show tonight and listening and talking with our special guest, Bradley, who has written a book. If you have never heard about this book, The Rise of the Warrior Cop, it's out there on Amazon and many other places to buy. Rise of the Warrior. It's a good book. I would encourage those who are interested to.
If I could put in a plug, my
Go ahead.
I'm writing now at I have a Substack newsletter, so it's radleybalco.substack.com, and that's where I do a lot of my reporting now is independent and reader supported. So if people want to check it out, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
All right. Thanks,
All right.
guys.
All right. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too.